The United Nations Security Council held its latest meeting on Somalia this week, focusing on elections, COVID-19, and security. Representatives joined online from their respective countries. James Swan, the head of the UN mission to Somalia, UNSOM, led off the proceedings. He recognized Somalia's progress in economic reforms. However, he did note that due to COVID-19, the federal government was projecting an 11% drop in GDP this year. Somalia's representative recognized that assistance will be needed in addressing the economic damage from the virus.
Families will need to be supported, and small and medium businesses enterprises cushion against the negative impact associated with COVID-19.
Swan praised continued reforms in the Somali security forces. He also focused on the liberation of a strategic town in Lower Shabelle by AMISOM and Somali troops in March. Swan noted that the Al-Shabaab is far from finished.
We regret that Al-Shabaab has not embraced the Secretary General's appeal for a global ceasefire and that their terrorist operations continue unabated.
Swan lauded AMISOM forces for drawing down by 1,000 troops March 5th on schedule. But the head of the African Union mission, AMISOM, Francisco Madeira, expressed reservations about progress toward ultimately handing over security responsibility to local institutions in 2021.
If the process of generating sufficient, well-trained, well-equipped, and regularly paid Somali security forces continues at the current pace, we may not, by the end of 2021, be able to achieve the goal of producing a critical mass of Somali forces capable of taking over from AMISOM, hold and preserve the gains accumulated over the years with so much sacrifice.
Agnes Marqueo from the UN Mine Action Service described the hundreds killed by improvised explosive devices in Somalia. But she said recent efforts have lessened the number of casualties so far in 2020. But the upcoming elections garnered the most attention.
Prior to the global pandemic, Somalia had set ambitious national priorities for 2020. These include the holding of the first direct elections in Somalia since 1969. As this council noted in November, the holding of peaceful, inclusive, credible, and transparent one-person, one-vote elections would be a historic step in rebuilding Somalia and would assist with the country's continued democratic development.
There is no reason why COVID-19 should prevent the key preparatory work from taking place. This is the time for government and opposition to put aside differences and find a compromise.
Swan noted two upcoming actions that will go a long way toward the success or failure of elections. The National Independent Election Commission is to report to both houses of Parliament about their progress May 27th. An ad hoc parliamentary committee is also to present recommendations for fixing gaps in the election law that was passed in February. Cooperation from and participation by federal member states is still a concern, among other issues.
We regret that it has been more than a year since the President and all federal member state leaders have met. Achievement of important national priorities urgently requires all to work together in the interests of the Somali people.
I'm concerned that against a backdrop of genuine preparation for elections, there are outstanding and potentially contentious issues that must be immediately addressed and completed. These, among others, include making the electoral law implementable, particularly ensuring a 30% quota for women's representation,
We urge President Farmajo to call a meeting of the National Security Council as required by the Constitution as soon as possible to discuss elections planning, security cooperation, and other urgent national priorities. We also remain concerned that security resources needed to fight al-Shabaab are being misused for political rivalries in certain regions.
The government was also put on notice that attacks in the media have been observed and threaten the legitimacy of the polls.
Mr. President, I want to express deep concern about recent actions taken to repress the media, with arrests of journalists in Somalia.
Effective democratic competition also requires an enabling environment that protects freedom of speech, assembly, and organization. I call on the federal government and federal member states to ensure these are fully respected, especially during this critical election year.
Swan called on all international partners to mobilize logistical and financial support for the elections in Somalia once details have been ironed out.